It can be pretty cool being a Beatles fan. And even if you never get to see them, you can still experience a little bit of Beatles magic. And that's the kind of week I just had. And it all began with Paul's version of the Vipers song, No Other Baby. The Vipers did it in 1958, and Paul recorded his version of it in 1999. It was on the Run Devil Run album, recorded and released in 1999, a year after Linda passed away. And, I think I really love that song because Paul really lets me in. He's vulnerable and he's open and his heart is breaking and, he tells me all about it and I can feel it. And then my heart begins to break, and I really love that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And it just doesn't happen that often. So when Paul does open up, I want to listen to that song, two or three times in a row. And so just earlier this week, I was, listening to it like two or three times in a row. And I said, you know what? I want to find out a little bit more about that song. And I want to find out a little bit more about, the album Run Devil Run. So I broke out Paul McCartney's 1999 interview where he's talking about Run Devil Run, the recording sessions, and he's going over each track. And he's talking about No Other Baby. And Paul is sort of confused about No Other Baby. Why do I like it? Where does it come from? How come I know all the words? How come it seems so familiar to me? I never had the record, and I never recorded it. Well, he finally figured out that the Vipers recorded it, and then he's talking to George Martin about it, and it turns out that George Martin actually produced the Vipers back in the day. And it also turns out that George produced that very record, the Vipers 1958 No Other Baby. And Paul was very excited about that, and Paul's comment was, everything is just kind of coming full circle. Very cool. Well, it probably would have been even cooler if Paul had remembered that way back when, according to Mark Lewison, John, Paul, and George, back in the early days, they covered No Other Baby, at their early gigs. So, yeah, that would have been really cool. I wonder if he ever remembered that or ever figured it out. And Paul is talking about the recording sessions, how they all came about. He said that he hadn't been in the studio, like singing, recording, or songwriting, all in the past year, because Linda had passed away the previous year. So he said, I want to just get back in there. I want to get back to basics. I want to do things the way that I used to do with the Beatles. Not a whole lot of rehearsals. Yeah, these are cover songs. That's cool. And I have a few of my own, just like with their Please Please Me album. That album, they pretty much recorded that all in one day. And so Paul wanted to have that same feel, fresh, live, warts and all, couple of mistakes here and there, not a whole lot of overdubs, not a whole lot of rehearsing, not all this production on it. And so that's what he was shooting for, that feeling. He said, I don't want to think about anything. I just want to do it. I just want to get on my bass. That's all I want to do, and sing the songs. So this is what I'm doing. And he did have 3 originals on that album, but the rest were these rock and roll covers, that everybody knew. So he gets other artists in the studio with him, Abbey Road, Studio 2, according to Paul, and there they are, and they bang out 4 songs a day, he says. He's achieving exactly what he wants, and he gets that, live, fresh sound, full of emotion, full of feels that I just love. And, and I had never, I'd never listened to that whole album. I never have. I do not have that album. Yeah, I've heard a few of the tracks, over the years, but I don't have the album. I never listened to it before. Sorry, please don't hate me. So I decided, after I, had listened to No Other Baby a few times, and then I listened to the interview a few times. It's a great interview. You got to check it out. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to just sit down now and listen to the album all the way through. So I go, this is great. So I'm starting listening, and it starts off with the rockers. One of them being that I really like is All Shook Up, Paul's version of that. It's great. It's terrific. I love a rocky, shouty Paul McCartney. I'm digging it. And then he gets into No Other Baby, which, I love. I'm all in my feels. I'm familiar with it. I know this is great. He's fabulous on it. And then he comes to the next song, which is Lonesome Town. which I'd never heard him do before. I'd never heard his version of it. And so my heart breaks anew. I mean, I think this one is even more powerful than No Other Baby. I mean, No Other Baby might be like a better sounding song, etc., but this one, Paul is just screaming and crying and shouting here. He is just up here in his high voice all throughout, just wailing and sobbing, and he's breaking my heart here. That's Paul in his feels, and like I said, it's a beautiful thing. So I listened to the rest of the album, and I'm all in my feels, that day. And I go, okay, this is hard. So I'm just kind of a little bit numb. Okay, what can I say? That's just who I am. So I go, okay, I need to cleanse my palate a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna go listen to some John Lennon, mid 70s John Lennon, and I go to that interview where he's talking to a DJ, and there's John promoting his Walls and Bridges album. So, mid 70s there, like what, 74, something like that. And so there he is, and he's talking to this DJ, and, the DJ's asked all the right question. John is very, glib, very funny. It's just terrific. I love it. I'm in my comfort zone here. And then all of a sudden, the DJ, of course, has to ask about Paul McCartney. Well, these days, mid 70s, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, they're a lot more on the same page. Things are a lot more amicable, thankfully. So the guy asks him, what, the new Paul McCartney album, I think it's a little bit better than his old one. What do you think, John? And John kind of takes a minute, and he says, what, I kind of like this one because Paul is taking off his overcoat and Paul's letting himself show through. This is the real him, so I think he's doing the right thing. I think I kind of like it. And I'm listening to that and I'm going, you know what, John, that's exactly what Paul is doing on this Run Devil Run album. Paul decided to just take the overcoat off, just keep it simple. I don't want to think none of this, arrangement, none of this, overproduction stuff. I'm not saying that's what he normally does, but they just want to keep it all simple. So it's just so fresh and so live and so real and like all in our feels, whether it's all shouty and happy and rocky or down here like, in Lonesome Town. I mean, oh my God. So it's a great album, like I said, and John, just chooses the exact right words. So I'm just going, yeah, John, yeah, that's it, man. Thank you. So I go, okay, so that feels pretty good. And then later on that day, I just kind of say, I want to listen to Ringo. So I want to hear Ringo talk. So I go, okay, here's a Ringo from 1976, and he's talking to Elliot Mintz. And this is the one where Ringo is, talking about, growing up in Liverpool and then going to Hamburg and yada, yada, yada. So Ringo's talking about that, and he's telling about what he liked, what the music scene in Liverpool when he was growing up. And he said, that's all skiffle. A bunch of skiffle groups, and he said there were a couple popular ones, and one that he really liked was the Vipers. And I'm going, okay, so we know Ringo. So my little ears perk up, and I'm going, okay, now that's interesting. Ringo talking about the Vipers, Paul talking about the Vipers, Paul kind of, taking off the overcoat, getting back to basics, really letting us see who Paul McCartney really is, okay, I'm kind of digging it. So things are starting to kind of click and come full circle for me here, just right after I'm listening to all the, the Paul's album, Paul's songs, the interviews and John and all that. So it's starting to get a little bit interesting, but still no big deal. It's just a little bit of Beatles magic. It's the kind of thing that happens every day. So I'm going, okay, that's kind of cool. That's interesting. And then Ringo keeps talking. He talks about when he's in Hamburg with Roy Storm and the Hurricanes. And he's there, and he sees up on stage this other group. He's looking at the Beatles, and he says, "Hey, man, I really like these guys. I really like what they're doing. I dig their sound." So, and he says he's calling out these requests. He says, "You know what? I really like what they're doing." And they had this one song I really liked. It was a slow Elvis Presley song. It was like a love ballad. He said. And he didn't remember the name of the song, but he just said it was a slow Elvis Presley love song. And it made me remember about this one time what Paul said, in an entirely different interview. Paul remembers this. And he says he remembers Ringo calling out these requests. And this is before, Ringo was a Beatle. And he's remembering this guy calling out all these sad songs, wanting to hear these sad country songs, sitting there at this table. And he's going, is this guy okay? Is this guy all right? He's asking for all these sad songs. So here's Ringo loving the Beatles, wanting Paul and John and George, wanting them to get him in his feels. So again, I'm going, oh my God, that's really cool. That's pretty cool. So the next day, I'm going, okay, I'm going to put all this to the test. So I go, let's see what George has to say here. So I'm just going to pick a random George interview. I'm just going to try out this Beatles Magic. So I just pick one and I just click and it starts going. And it was, these guys were talking about George's posthumous album, Brainwashed. And you're hearing from Jeff Lynne, you're hearing from Danny Harrison, and you're also hearing from George from about 2000 or 2001. And they asked George, or they're talking to George about, hey, what kind of music do you like? And so George is responding and he says, you know what? I really want to feel something. I want to feel what the singer's going through. I want to feel something with the music. What I like is I just like the guy in the guitar, with the microphone and he's just singing, not all this production, no big deal, not all these studio gimmicks, just something live and fresh. I want to feel it. And that's what I like. And so I'm going, okay, now we have something here. So George chimes in too. So now we really have come full circle. So I'm going, okay, this is really, really interesting. And we really do have some Beatles magic, but we're not finished yet. We really aren't. So later on that evening, I'm not testing anything else anymore. I'm absolutely thoroughly convinced about the existence of Beatles Magic right here where I am in my home. Okay. And then, so I'm just sitting back here and I'm just, doing whatever else I'm doing. I have an Alan Williams interview playing in the background. Okay. And I'm just not expecting anything. I'm just, listening to him talk. He's very entertaining, telling all these stories of the Beatles when they were in Hamburg. Okay. It's really cool. So here he is, like near the end of the interview. It's like, 40 minutes in or so. And he's talking about, when they were all in Hamburg and he was talking about what they would play. And he doesn't name any songs. He just says, yeah, they played all these different songs. But he does hone in on one song in particular that they play. And it's a slow Elvis Presley love song. And I'm going, no. So what is happening? It's almost exactly what Ringo said the other night, verbatim. Okay? It's like, what's up with this? What is going on? I'm just flabbergasted. Okay. I just can't explain it. I really do not know what's going on. It's just kind of like, I'm just sitting there going, what is happening here? Because here's, it all, like I said, it all starts with Paul McCartney, me loving that song, Northern Baby, getting all my feels, Paul basically talking about his broken heart and saying, I just want to get back in the studio. I just want to get in my feels. I just want to express myself. This is all I want to do. He takes his overcoat off, that fabulous phrase that John Lennon just pegs. He just nails it right then and there. Paul, I love Paul. This is the real Paul, taking his overcoat off. And then Ringo talking about the Vipers, Paul McCartney talking about the Vipers. And then we have George Harrison the next day just kind of talking, I want to be all in my feels. Ringo talking about, I just want to be in my feels. Play me those sad songs, guys. I just love them. George going, please play me those songs where I can feel something. And then Alan Williams, of course, putting in his 2 cents and saying, yeah, they played this really sad Elvis Presley song. So I don't know what to say. I really don't. And there's just really no point to all this. I mean, what are you going to say? It's just, what do we need to say? There's really nothing you can say here. Because again, it's all, it does all come full circle, just like what Paul said. And it's these guys just having that bond, it is all about love, and what more do you need than that? That's all you really need, basically, right? All you need is love. So I really appreciate you spending some time with me here tonight. And until next time, peace and love one another. Take care.